The fluorescent lights in the downtown Seattle law office buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the mahogany conference table that stretched between adversaries like a battlefield. Sarah Mitchell sat rigidly in the butter-soft leather chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white as bone. The familiar scent of expensive cologne and legal documents filled the air, a combination that now made her stomach churn with anxiety. Across from her, her husband of 15 years lounged back with the casual confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. Every ace, every king, every trump that mattered. "Sarah, let's be reasonable here," David said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone she'd grown to despise over the past 6 months. The same tone he'd used when explaining why she couldn't have access to their joint bank accounts, why she didn't need to know about his business trips, why her concerns were always overreactions. "You know as well as I do that fighting this is pointless. Take the settlement offer and let's both move on with our lives. Think about Emma and Jake. They need stability, not a drawn-out court battle that will traumatize them further." The mention of their children hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma, 10 years old with David's stubborn chin and Sarah's gentle eyes, who still asked every night when Daddy was coming home. Jake, 12 and trying to be the man of the house, carrying burdens no child should bear. David knew exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to probe. He'd been doing it for years, long before the divorce papers were ever filed. To David's right sat Richard Blackwood, Seattle's most feared divorce attorney, a man whose reputation preceded him like a dark cloud rolling in from the Olympic Mountains. His reputation was built on the bones of destroyed families, shattered dreams, and women who'd walked into court believing in justice only to leave with nothing but restraining orders against seeing their own children. Ruthless, calculating, and with a track record of leaving opposing spouses with nothing but the clothes on their backs and debts they'd never incurred. His silver hair was slicked back perfectly with what was probably $100 pomade. His Armani suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And that smirk, that infuriating, condescending smirk that said he'd already won before, the game had even begun, never left his face. "Mrs. Mitchell," Blackwood drawled, shuffling through his papers with theatrical precision. "My client is being more than generous. Considering your circumstances, I'd strongly advise you to accept this offer before we're forced to present certain evidence that might be uncomfortable for you." Sarah's attorney, Jennifer Walsh, shifted uncomfortably beside her, the leather of her chair creaking like old bones. Jennifer was good, damn good, with a law degree from University of Washington and 15 years of family law experience under her belt. She'd won cases that other attorneys wouldn't touch, had taken on the city's most powerful men, and emerged victorious. But even she looked intimidated by Blackwood's reputation, her usual confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone preparing for an uphill battle against impossible odds. The younger attorney had taken Sarah's case pro bono after 3 other lawyers had mysteriously withdrawn, citing conflicts of interest that Sarah suspected had more to do with David's growing influence in the city's business circles than actual ethical concerns. "What circumstances?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The October rain pelted against the 20th floor windows with increasing intensity, creating rivulets that distorted the view of Elliott Bay below like tears on glass. The gray Seattle sky seemed to mirror the storm clouds gathering in her life, pregnant with the kind of darkness that made the city famous worldwide. From this height, the city looked peaceful, orderly. Ferry boats cutting clean lines through the dark water, traffic flowing in predictable patterns along the waterfront. Nothing like the chaos that had become her existence since David had announced, 6 months ago, that he was no longer happy in their marriage. Blackwood's smirk widened, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Come now, Mrs. Mitchell. We both know about your episodes, the medication, the time you spent at Cedar Hills." He said the name of the psychiatric facility like it was a dirty word. "And then there's the drinking, the isolation, your inability to maintain steady employment for the past 3 years. Each word hit Sarah like a physical blow, carefully aimed and devastatingly effective. She felt Jennifer tense beside her like a coiled spring, and across the table, David had the decency to look away, though whether from shame or impatience she couldn't tell. But Blackwood? He was enjoying this like a connoisseur savoring fine wine. She could see it in his eyes, the predatory gleam of a man who lived for these moments of psychological warfare, who fed off the desperation of women fighting for their children, their homes, their very identities. "Those photos your investigator took of me leaving my therapist's office," Sarah said quietly, "don't prove anything except that I was getting help." "Context is everything, Mrs. Mitchell," Blackwood replied smoothly. "A jury will see a woman who couldn't handle the pressures of marriage, who turned to alcohol and prescription drugs, who became so unstable that her own husband feared for their children's safety. Meanwhile, they'll see David, successful businessman, pillar of the community, devoted father trying to protect his children from an increasingly erratic mother." The words hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the room and contaminating the very air she breathed. Sarah could feel her chest tightening, that familiar panic trying to claw its way up her throat like a living thing. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. For a moment, she was back in that dark place, the place where David's gaslighting had convinced her she was losing her mind, where his subtle manipulations had isolated her from friends and family one by one, where his carefully orchestrated campaign had made her question her own sanity, her own worth, her own reality. But then she thought about Emma and Jake, her 10 and 12-year-old children, probably sitting in their rooms right now at David's downtown penthouse, wondering why Mommy and Daddy couldn't just get along, why their world had been turned upside down, why the family they'd known and loved had simply ceased to exist overnight. She thought about the house on Mercer Island, the house where she'd raised those children from infancy, where she'd planted the garden that bloomed every spring like a promise of renewal, where she'd hung their artwork on the refrigerator and marked their heights on the doorframe of the kitchen pantry. David was trying to take away from her not just a building, but the repository of 15 years of memories, the place where she'd become a mother, a woman, a person she'd thought she could be proud of. She thought about the life she'd built, brick by brick, only to watch David systematically tear it down. "The settlement offers you the cottage in Bellingham," David said, his tone suggesting he was doing her an enormous favor. "It's more than fair, Sarah. You'll have a place to live, a small monthly allowance, and supervised visitation with the kids every other weekend." Supervised visitation. The words made her stomach churn, as if she were some kind of danger to her own children, the children she'd given birth to, raised, protected, loved with every fiber of her being. "And if I don't accept?" Sarah asked. Blackwood's eyes lit up like a shark scenting blood in the water. "Then we go to court. And I promise you, Mrs. Mitchell, by the time I'm done presenting my case, you'll be lucky to get supervised visitation, once a month. The court will see exactly what kind of mother you really are." The threat hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Sarah looked at Jennifer, who was staring down at her legal pad, clearly outgunned and knowing it. 3 months of preparation, and they both knew they were walking into a slaughter. "I need time to think," Sarah said finally. "You have 24 hours, Blackwood replied, checking his platinum Rolex with theatrical precision. "After that, the offer is off the table and we proceed to trial. Trust me, Mrs. Mitchell, you don't want this to go to trial." That night, Sarah sat in her empty kitchen on Mercer Island, the house eerily quiet without the children's laughter echoing through the halls like music she'd taken for granted. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady drumming of rain against the windows and the occasional creak of settling wood. David had taken Emma and Jake to his downtown penthouse 3 weeks ago, claiming they needed stability during this difficult time, as if ripping them away from the only home they'd ever known was somehow stabilizing. The rain continued to drum against the windows with hypnotic persistence, and every shadow seemed to mock her, every familiar object a reminder of the life that was slipping away piece by piece. She poured herself a glass of wine, just one, because she knew they were watching, always watching, documenting her every move like scientists studying a lab rat, and stared at the settlement papers spread across the granite countertop like tarot cards predicting a dismal future. 24 hours to decide whether to fight for everything she'd worked for or accept defeat and slink away like a wounded animal, tail between her legs, grateful for whatever scraps they were willing to throw her way. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Lisa in Portland. "How did it go today? Call me when you can." But Sarah couldn't bring herself to call. How do you tell someone that the man you loved and trusted for 15 years had systematically destroyed your reputation, your confidence, and your life? How do you explain that his lawyer had just threatened to annihilate you in court, using your own struggles against you? She walked through the house, each room telling the story of a life that was about to be erased. The living room where she'd hosted countless birthday parties and holiday gatherings. The kitchen where she'd taught Emma how to make chocolate chip, cookies, and helped Jake with his science projects. The master bedroom where she'd once felt safe and loved. Now it all felt like a museum of her former life, artifacts of a woman who had believed in forever. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, and almost without thinking, she opened it and began typing. If she was going down, maybe she could at least leave a record of the truth. She began documenting everything. The gradual isolation from friends, the financial control, the subtle put-downs that had slowly eroded her self-worth. But as she typed, something else began to emerge. A pattern. Dates and times that hadn't seemed significant at the time but now formed a larger picture. David's business trips that had become more frequent over the past 2 years. The mysterious phone calls he'd taken in the garage. The credit card statements she'd questioned but he'd explained away. Sarah stopped typing and stared at the screen. Then, moving with sudden purpose, she went to the home office they'd shared. David had taken his laptop and important files, but he'd left behind years of documents, photos, and receipts that hadn't seemed important enough to destroy. She began, searching, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Bank statements, hotel receipts, restaurant bills for two when David claimed to be dining alone with clients. Flight records that didn't match his reported travel itinerary, and then she found them, hidden in a folder marked Tax Documents 2018. Photos that David had probably forgotten about. Photos from his phone that had automatically backed up to their shared cloud account. Photos that told a very different story than the one Richard Blackwood was planning to present in court. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through image after image. David wasn't just having an affair. He was having multiple affairs. And the timestamps on the photos showed they went back years, some dating to when Emma was just a toddler and Sarah was pregnant with Jake. But it wasn't just the infidelity that made her heart race. It was the locations. Expensive hotels in cities where David claimed to be attending business conferences. Romantic dinners at restaurants where he'd told Sarah he was meeting with clients. Weekend getaways to places he'd said were mandatory company retreats. All lies. All documented. All time-stamped and geotagged with devastating precision. There were screenshots of text conversations, obviously saved as some kind of twisted trophies. Messages to women whose names Sarah didn't recognize. Arranging meetings. Sharing intimate details, making promises, and the amounts of money. God, the amounts of money he'd been spending on these women while telling Sarah they needed to cut back on household expenses. One photo made her stomach lurch. David and a young blonde woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, in what was clearly a hotel room. But what made it worse was the date stamp, Emma's 8th birthday. The day Sarah had frantically called David because their daughter had a fever and was asking for her daddy. The day he'd claimed to be stuck in a crucial business meeting in Vancouver. He'd been in a hotel room in downtown Seattle, less than 20 minutes away. Sarah printed everything. Every photo, every screenshot, every receipt that corroborated. the timeline of David's deceptions. As the printer hummed through page after page, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: power. For 2 years, David and his high-priced attorney had been building a narrative about her instability, her drinking, her inability to cope with the pressures of marriage. They'd painted her as the problem, the weak link, the reason their perfect family had fallen apart. But now she had the truth. Not just suspicions or hunches, but cold, hard evidence of exactly who had destroyed their marriage and why. The rain had stopped by the time she finished organizing the evidence. Sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of printed photos and documents, Sarah felt more clear-headed than she had in years. Tomorrow, she would walk back into that conference room where Richard Blackwood sat with his smug smile and his carefully crafted threats. But this time, she wouldn't be walking in empty-handed. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Jennifer's number. Her attorney answered on the second ring, sounding exhausted. "Sarah? Is everything okay? I know today was rough, but—" "Jennifer," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady and strong for the first time in months. "We're not taking the settlement." "Sarah, I understand you're upset, but Blackwood wasn't bluffing. If we go to trial—" "We're going to trial," Sarah said firmly. "And we're going to win." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, what aren't you telling me?" Sarah looked at the evidence spread across her table, each piece a nail in the coffin of David's carefully constructed lies. "I found something, Jennifer. Something that changes everything." "What kind of something?" "The kind that's going to wipe that smirk right off Richard Blackwood's face." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a strength she'd forgotten she possessed flowing back into her veins. David had spent 2 years breaking her down, convincing her she was weak, unstable, unworthy of love or respect. His lawyer had just spent an afternoon trying to intimidate her into submission with threats and psychological warfare. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated her. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to fight. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the Seattle skyline emerging from the fog like a city reborn. Sarah had barely slept, but she felt more alert and focused than she had in months. The evidence was organized, labeled, and waiting in a manila envelope that felt heavier than gold in her hands. Jennifer Walsh arrived at the house on Mercer Island at 8 a.m. sharp, her usually perfect composure showing cracks around the edges. The young attorney's dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she carried herself with the determined air of someone preparing for war. "Show me," Jennifer said without preamble, as Sarah led her into the kitchen. Sarah spread the documents across the granite countertop like a dealer laying out cards. Jennifer's eyes widened as she took in the scope of what Sarah had uncovered. Photo after photo, receipt after receipt, a meticulously documented trail of infidelity and financial deception stretching back years. "Jesus Christ, Sarah," Jennifer whispered, picking up a particularly damning photo of David and a redhead in what was clearly a compromising position. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the timestamps, at least 4 years, maybe longer." Sarah pointed to a cluster of hotel receipts. "Look at this pattern. Every time David told me he was traveling for business, he was actually meeting up with different women. And look at the amounts he was spending." Jennifer's trained eye quickly scanned the financial documents. $60,000 in hotel rooms alone over the past 2 years. Restaurant bills averaging $300 per night. Jewelry purchases, designer clothing. She looked up at Sarah with growing amazement. "While he was telling you the family needed to cut expenses. Remember when he said we couldn't afford Emma's violin lessons? That was the same week he spent $4,000 on a weekend in Napa with someone named Brittany." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I found their text messages. He promised to leave me for her, but then she got tired of waiting and moved on." Jennifer continued examining the evidence, her legal mind already working through the implications. "This isn't just adultery, Sarah. This is financial fraud. He was using marital assets to fund these affairs, while systematically isolating you from family finances. And look at this. She held up a bank statement. He's been moving money into accounts you don't have access to. The doorbell rang, interrupting their analysis. Sarah froze. David wasn't supposed to pick up the kids until evening, and she wasn't expecting anyone else. "I'll get it," Jennifer said, moving toward the front door with protective instincts that spoke to her experience with volatile divorce cases. Sarah heard muffled voices. Then Jennifer returned with a woman Sarah didn't recognize. She was petite with short auburn hair and nervous energy that filled the room like electricity. "Sarah, this is Detective Maria Santos with Seattle PD. She asked to speak with you." Detective Santos extended her hand with a firm grip that spoke of confidence earned through years of dealing with difficult situations. "Mrs. Mitchell, I apologize for the early hour, but I received a very interesting phone call last night. From a woman named Rebecca Chen." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but Jennifer was already reaching for her notepad. "Ms. Chen claims to have information about your husband that she believes you should know before your divorce proceedings continue," Santos continued. "She's actually one of the women in your photos there." Sarah's stomach dropped. "One of his affairs?" "Former affair, yes. She ended the relationship 6 months ago, but she's been following the divorce proceedings in the news. Your husband's prominence in the business community has made this fairly public. She reached out because she's concerned about the narrative being presented about you." Detective Santos pulled out her own folder. "Ms. Chen kept detailed records of her relationship with your husband. Text messages, emails, recorded phone conversations where he discussed you in unflattering terms. But more importantly, she has evidence that he's been systematically manipulating your medical treatment." The words hit Sarah like ice water. "What do you mean?" "According to Ms. Chen, your husband bragged about convincing your doctor to prescribe stronger anxiety medications. He wanted you to appear more unstable so he could use it against you in divorce proceedings. He also arranged for someone to follow you and photograph you during your most vulnerable moments, leaving therapy, during panic attacks, that time you broke down in the grocery store parking lot." Sarah felt the room spinning. Those photos Blackwood had threatened to use against her. David had orchestrated them. Her own husband had weaponized her mental health struggles, the very struggles he had helped create through years of gaslighting and emotional abuse. "There's more," Detective Santos continued gently. "Ms. Chen recorded a conversation where your husband discussed hiring private investigators to document your erratic behavior. He specifically mentioned planning to have you followed to your therapy appointments to make it appear you were more unstable than you actually were." Jennifer was scribbling notes furiously. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud. He deliberately manipulated evidence to present a false narrative in legal proceedings." "The Abar district attorney is very interested in this case," Santos confirmed. "Financial fraud, emotional abuse, conspiracy. We're looking at serious criminal charges, not just civil matters." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of David's betrayal crushing down on her like a physical force. It wasn't enough that he'd cheated, lied, and stolen from their family. He deliberately tried to destroy her sanity, her credibility, her relationship with their children. "How many women?" Sarah asked quietly. Detective Santos consulted her notes. "Based on what? We've uncovered so far. At least 7 over the past 4 years. But that's just the ones we know about. Ms. Chen believes there were others." 7, Sarah repeated numbly. While she'd been struggling with anxiety and depression, believing she was failing as a wife and mother, David had been living a completely separate life. Multiple separate lives. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "David, hope you've made the right decision about the settlement. The kids are asking when they can come home permanently." The casual cruelty of it, using their children as leverage while knowing exactly what he'd put her through, ignited something fierce and protective in Sarah's chest. "I want to press charges," she said suddenly, looking up at Detective Santos. All of them. Every charge you can make stick. Sarah, Jennifer said carefully, criminal charges will complicate the divorce proceedings. We need to think strategically about— No. Sarah's voice was steel. I'm done being strategic. I'm done being quiet and reasonable and accommodating. He destroyed my life systematically and deliberately, and he used my own struggles against me. He's been stealing from our children's future to fund his affairs, and now he's threatening to take those children away from me based on lies he created. She stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the sound. The water was calm today, reflecting the autumn sky like a mirror. How many other women has he done this to? How many wives has Richard Blackwood destroyed using tactics like these? Detective Santos exchanged a look with Jennifer. Actually, that's something else we're investigating. Mr. Blackwood's methods in several high-profile divorce cases have raised some ethical questions. If we can prove he was complicit in manufacturing evidence, you could take down both of them, Jennifer finished, her legal mind immediately grasping the implications. Sarah turned back to face them, and for the first time in months, she felt truly powerful. Then let's take them down. The next few hours were a whirlwind of legal, strategy, and evidence organization. Jennifer called in favors from colleagues who specialized in criminal law, while Detective Santos coordinated with financial crimes investigators to trace David's hidden assets and fraudulent transactions. By noon, they had assembled a case that was devastating in its scope and detail. David hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been conducting what amounted to a criminal enterprise, using marital assets to fund a lifestyle of deception, while systematically destroying his wife's mental health and credibility. The timing is crucial, Jennifer explained as they prepared for the afternoon's confrontation. Blackwood doesn't know we have this evidence. He's going to walk into that conference room expecting to intimidate you into submission, but instead, we're going to serve him with criminal charges and ethics violations, Sarah finished. Her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, Sarah answered with confidence. Hello, David. Sarah, I hope you've come to your senses. Richard says you have until 3 o'clock to accept the settlement. After that what? Sarah interrupted. You'll destroy me in court using fabricated evidence? You'll use the mental health struggles you helped create against me. You'll steal our children away using lies you manufactured? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I don't know what you think I know about Rebecca Chen, David. I know about Jessica Martinez. I know about Brittany Williams and Amanda Foster and all the others. I know about the hotel rooms and the jewelry and the $60,000 you stole from our children's college funds. Another silence. Longer this time. Sarah, whatever someone has told you. I know about the private investigators you hired to photograph me during panic attacks. I know about you manipulating my medication. I know about every lie you've told and every life you've destroyed. She could hear David breathing heavily on the other end of the line, the confident businessman, replaced by a cornered animal. See you in court, David, Sarah said, and hung up. Jennifer was grinning. That felt good, didn't it? Better than good, Sarah replied. That felt like justice. At 2:30, they loaded boxes of evidence into Jennifer's car and drove downtown, to the law offices where Richard Blackwood waited with his smug confidence and his carefully crafted threats. But this time, Sarah wasn't walking in as a victim. She was walking in as a prosecutor. The Seattle afternoon was crisp and clear, the autumn light slanting through the glass towers of the financial district. Sarah looked up at the building that housed Blackwood's offices and felt no fear, no intimidation, only determination. Ready? Jennifer asked as they stood in the marble lobby. Sarah thought about Emma and Jake, probably wondering why their family had fallen apart. She thought about all the nights she'd lain awake questioning her own sanity while David manipulated her. Reality. She thought about every woman who'd been destroyed by men like David and lawyers like Blackwood. I've been ready for this my whole life, Sarah said. I just didn't know it until now. As they stepped into the elevator, Sarah clutched the envelope containing the photos that would change everything. In a few minutes, Richard Blackwood's world was about to come crashing down, and she was going to be the one holding the wrecking ball. The conference room felt different this time. The same harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same mahogany table gleamed under their glare, but the energy in the room had shifted dramatically. Sarah sat with her spine straight, her hands steady, the manila envelope resting on the table before her like a loaded weapon. Richard Blackwood entered with his usual theatrical flourish, his silver hair perfectly styled, his $1,000 suit immaculate. That infamous smirk was already spreading across his face as he settled into his chair across from Sarah. David followed behind him, but something had changed in her husband's demeanor. Where yesterday he'd been casually confident, today he seemed nervous, fidgety, avoiding eye contact. "Well, Mrs. Mitchell," Blackwood drawled, opening his leather portfolio with practiced precision. "I trust you've had time to consider our generous offer. Shall we proceed with the paperwork, or do you insist on making this more difficult than it needs to be?" Jennifer Walsh entered the room with Detective Santos and two other individuals Sarah didn't recognize. A stern-faced woman in a navy suit, and a man carrying a briefer full of legal documents. Blackwood's smirk faltered slightly. "I wasn't aware we were having additional attendees to this meeting." "Mr. Blackwood," Jennifer said formally, "I'd like you to meet Detective Maria Santos with Seattle PD, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Morrison, and Ethics Investigator James Chen from the Washington State Bar Association." The color drained from Blackwood's face like water from a broken dam. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his confident facade crumbling by the second. "What is the meaning of this?" Blackwood demanded, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. Sarah stood up slowly, savoring the moment she'd dreamed about for months. "The meaning, Mr. Blackwood, is that your client has been living a lie, and you've been helping him perpetuate it." She opened the manila envelope and began placing photographs on the table, one by one. Each image landed with the soft whisper of paper against wood, but in the sudden silence of the room, they might as well have been gunshots. The first photo showed David and a blonde woman in an intimate embrace outside a downtown hotel. The timestamp read, March 15th, Emma's birthday. The day David had claimed to be in urgent business meetings and missed their daughter's party. The second photo, David and a different woman, this one a redhead, sharing a romantic dinner at an expensive waterfront restaurant. The date stamp showed it was taken during the weekend David had told Sarah he was attending a mandatory company retreat. The third, fourth, fifth, a parade of infidelity and deception, each image time-stamped and geotagged with devastating precision. "Jesus Christ," Detective Santos muttered, though she'd seen the photos before. Their impact in this formal setting was even more devastating. Blackwood was staring at the images like a man watching his career spontaneously combust. "Where did you get these?" "From your client's own phone," Sarah replied calmly. "Amazing what? People forget they've backed up to shared cloud accounts." She placed another set of documents on the table. Bank statements, credit card receipts, hotel bills. $60,000 in hotel expenses over 2 years, Mr. Blackwood. Another $40,000 in jewelry, dinners, and gifts. All while David was telling me we couldn't afford our children's extracurricular activities. David finally found his voice. "Sarah, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted. "You've been stealing from our children's college funds to pay for your affairs. You've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone who trusted you." She reached for another set of papers, printed screenshots of text messages. "But the real betrayal, David, is this." She began reading from the messages. "Sarah's getting worse. I think the new medication is really affecting her judgment. She had another episode at the grocery store yesterday. I made sure someone got photos." The room went dead silent. Even the building's air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "You orchestrated my breakdown," Sarah continued, her voice growing. stronger with each word. You manipulated my medical treatment, hired investigators to photograph me during panic attacks, and then used my mental health struggles you deliberately exacerbated, as weapons against me in our divorce. Assistant. District Attorney Morrison stepped forward. Mr. David Mitchell, you're under arrest for financial fraud, conspiracy to commit perjury, and emotional abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights echoed through the conference room, Sarah felt a surge of vindication so powerful it almost made her dizzy. David's face had gone completely white, and he was looking around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that didn't exist. But it was Blackwood's reaction that truly satisfied her. The legendary attorney was staring at the evidence spread across the table with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse. His hands were actually shaking as he reached for his own legal pad. "This is highly irregular," Blackwood stammered. "This meeting was scheduled to discuss settlement terms. This meeting," Ethics Investigator Chen interrupted, "is now about your violation of approximately 12 different rules of professional conduct. We have evidence that you knowingly presented fabricated evidence in family court proceedings, conspired with your client to commit fraud, and engaged in systematic intimidation tactics that cross the line from zealous advocacy to criminal behavior." Sarah placed one final document on the table, a recording device. Rebecca Chen, one of David's former mistresses, recorded their conversations, including the ones where David bragged about having the best divorce attorney in Seattle, one who wasn't afraid to get creative with evidence. She pressed play. David's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakably clear. "Richard says we can make Sarah look completely unstable. He's got investigators following her, and her therapist is willing to provide testimony about her mental state. By the time we're done, she'll be lucky to get supervised visitation once a month." Then Blackwood's voice. "The key is building a narrative of instability that the jury will believe. A few strategically timed photographs, some medical records, taken out of context, and testimony about her drinking. It's a foolproof strategy." The recording continued for several more damning minutes before Sarah turned it off. The silence that followed was deafening. "You destroyed innocent families," Sarah said, looking directly at Blackwood. "How many women have you done this to? How many mothers have lost their children because you manufactured evidence against them?" Blackwood's famous composure had completely cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hands trembled as he tried to organize his papers. This is taken out of context. Legal strategy doesn't include conspiracy to commit perjury," Morrison interrupted. "Mr. Blackwood, you're also under arrest." As two sets of handcuffs clicked into place, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening of tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. David was led away first, still protesting his innocence, still trying to manipulate the situation, even as his world crumbled around him. As he passed Sarah's chair, he leaned down and whispered, "You'll never get the kids now. I'll make sure of that." Sarah looked up at him with eyes that no longer held fear or self-doubt. "David, in about an hour, every major news outlet in Seattle is going to be running the story of your arrest. By tonight, your business partners will be distancing themselves from you. Your assets will be frozen pending investigation, and Emma and Jake will finally understand who their father really is." For the first time in their 15-year marriage, David had no response. Blackwood's exit was even more satisfying. The man who had built his reputation on intimidation and psychological warfare was now shuffling toward the door in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said as the officers paused at the door, "this isn't over. I have resources you can't imagine. I'll fight these charges, and when I do—" "When you do," Sarah interrupted, "you'll find that 7 other women have come forward with similar stories about your tactics. Rebecca Chen wasn't your only victim, Mr. Blackwood. She was just the first one brave enough to speak up." As the door closed behind the 2 men who had terrorized her for months, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The conference room, which had felt like a courtroom for her execution just 24 hours earlier, now felt like the site of her resurrection. Detective Santos began packing up the evidence. "We'll need you to come in for a formal statement tomorrow. But Mrs. Mitchell, what you've done here, gathering this evidence, building this case, most people wouldn't have had the strength. Most people don't get backed into a corner by someone they trusted for 15 years, Sarah replied. Most people don't have to fight for their children against their own husband. Jennifer was grinning so widely her face might have cramped. Sarah, not only are you going to get everything, the house, full custody, alimony, but David's criminal liability means you'll probably end up with assets he tried to hide from you. And Blackwood's firm, Sarah asked, will likely be dissolved within 6 months, ethics investigator Chen confirmed. We've been building a case against him for years, but we needed smoking gun evidence like this. You just gave us everything. We needed to clean up family court in this city. As the room emptied and Sarah gathered her things, she caught sight of herself in the reflective surface of the conference table. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had sat in this same chair yesterday. Stronger, clearer, unbroken. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Lisa. Saw the news alerts. Are you okay? Sarah smiled as she typed back. I'm more than okay. I'm free. Outside the law office, the Seattle afternoon was crisp and bright. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the glass towers reaching toward the sky, and felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in years. Tomorrow, she would start the process of rebuilding her life. Tomorrow, she would sit down with Emma and Jake and begin the difficult conversation about their father's choices. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to move forward as a single mother with the strength she'd forgotten she possessed. But today, she had won a battle that everyone, including herself, had thought was impossible to win. As she walked toward her car, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Amanda Foster. I saw the news about your case and I was involved with your husband too. I have information I think you should hear. Sarah leaned against her car and listened as another piece of David's elaborate deception came to light. But instead of feeling devastated by yet another revelation, she felt empowered. Each new truth that emerged only strengthened her position and validated her decision to fight. Amanda, Sarah said when the woman finished her story, would you be willing to speak with Detective Santos? Your information could help ensure David and his lawyer face appropriate consequences for what they've done. Absolutely, Amanda replied. What they did to you, what they tried to do, it's not just wrong, it's evil. I want to help stop them from doing it to anyone else. As Sarah hung up the phone and drove home to the house on Mercer Island, her house now, secured by David's own criminal behavior, she thought about the other women who might be out there, trapped in similar situations, convinced they were powerless against men like David and lawyers like Blackwood. She thought about the mothers who might be losing their children to fabricated evidence and manufactured crises. She thought about the wives who might be accepting unfair settlements because they believed they had no choice. And she realized that her victory today was bigger than just her own case. It was a crack in a system that had been rigged against women for too long. By the time she pulled into her driveway, Sarah had made a decision. This wasn't the end of her fight. It was the beginning. She was going to use her experience, her evidence, and her newfound strength to help other women who found themselves in similar situations. But first, she had to tell her children that their father was going to jail. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in her kitchen on a crisp November morning, watching Emma and Jake eat breakfast at the same granite countertop where she'd spread out the evidence that changed everything. The autumn light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, as if the world itself had been cleansed by the truth. Mom, are you really going to be on TV again today? Emma asked, her 10-year-old voice mixing curiosity with concern. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and difficult conversations about their father's choices. "Just for a few minutes," Sarah replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Some other women have been reaching out, and I want to help them understand that they're not alone." Jake, now 12 and trying to process his father's betrayal with the seriousness of someone much older, looked up from his cereal. "Will Dad be in jail for a long time?" Sarah sat down beside her children, choosing her words carefully. David's criminal trial was still pending, but the evidence was so overwhelming that his own attorneys were negotiating a plea deal. The financial fraud charges alone carried a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years. "Your father made some very bad choices, Jake. He hurt our family, and he hurt other families too. The judge will decide what the consequences should be." "But he's still our dad," Emma said quietly, and Sarah's heart ached at the confusion in her daughter's voice. "He will always be your father," Sarah confirmed. "And when he's ready to be honest about what he did and why he did it, we'll figure out how to move forward. But right now, our job is to heal and to help other people who are going through similar situations." The doorbell rang, and Sarah recognized the familiar sound of Jennifer's footsteps on the front porch. Her attorney had become more than just legal counsel over the past month. She'd become a friend and ally in Sarah's growing mission to reform the family court system. "Good morning, Mitchell family," Jennifer said as she entered the kitchen, her arms full of newspapers and legal documents. "Ready for the big day?" Today marked the official announcement of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Family Justice, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping women navigate high-conflict divorces and exposing unethical practices in family court. The foundation had been Sarah's idea, but it had quickly gained support from legal experts, women's rights organizations, and survivors of similar situations. "Look at this," Jennifer said, spreading the Seattle Times across the counter. The headline, "Rita Heron Divorce Reform Sweeps Seattle. New Foundation Aims to Protect Vulnerable Families." But it was the smaller headline that made Sarah smile. "Blackwood Firm Officially Dissolved. Partners Distance Themselves from Disgraced Attorney." Richard Blackwood's legal empire had crumbled faster than anyone could have predicted. 3 of Rio. His partners had been arrested on related charges. 6 high-profile cases had been overturned due to evidence tampering, and dozens of former clients were filing malpractice suits. The man who had terrorized Seattle's family courts for 2 decades was now facing disbarment, criminal charges, and financial ruin. "How many women have contacted the foundation so far?" Sarah asked, reviewing the stack of intake forms Jennifer had brought. 47 this week alone," Jennifer replied. "And that's just in Washington state. We're getting calls from Oregon, California, even some from back east. Women who saw your story and realized they weren't crazy, weren't alone, weren't the problem." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Santos. "David's plea hearing moved to 2 p.m. today. He's agreeing to full restitution and cooperation with ongoing investigations. You did it, Sarah." 3 hours later, Sarah stood outside the King County Courthouse, facing a crowd of reporters and supporters. The November wind whipped through her hair, but she felt steady, grounded, powerful in a way she'd never experienced before. "Mrs. Mitchell," called out a reporter from Channel 7. "How does it feel to know that your case has led to criminal charges against 7 attorneys and resulted in the overturning of dozens of family court decisions?" Sarah stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the crowd of faces, some familiar, some strange, all united by the shared experience of fighting against systems designed to silence them. "It feels like justice," she said simply. "But more than that, it feels like hope. For too long, women going through divorce have been told to be quiet, to be reasonable, to accept whatever scraps they're offered. We've been gaslit into believing that our struggles are our fault, that our pain doesn't matter, that we should be grateful for any outcome that doesn't completely destroy us." The crowd murmured its agreement, and Sarah felt the energy of shared experience flowing between them. I was one of those women, she continued. I was told I was unstable, that I was a bad mother, that I was lucky to get anything at all from my marriage. I was manipulated, intimidated, and nearly broken by a system that was supposed to protect me and my children. She paused, looking back at the courthouse where David and Blackwood had expected to destroy her just weeks earlier. But I had something they didn't count on, the truth. And once I found the courage to speak that truth, to document it, to fight for it, everything changed. Not just for me, but for dozens of other women who thought they were powerless. A reporter from the Washington Post stepped forward. What's next for the foundation? Sarah smiled, thinking about the plans she and Jennifer had been developing. We're launching a legal aid clinic for women in high-conflict divorces. We're training attorneys to recognize the signs of manufactured evidence and emotional abuse. We're working with legislators to reform family court procedures that have been weaponized against vulnerable people. And we're creating a database, Jennifer added, stepping up beside Sarah, to track attorneys who use unethical tactics, so they can't simply move to another state and continue destroying families. After the press conference, Sarah drove to Emma's school to pick up her children. The normalcy of carpool lanes and backpack-laden kids felt surreal after the morning's media attention, but it also felt grounding. This was what she'd fought for, the right to be a mother to her children, to build a life based on truth rather than lies. How was school? She asked as Emma and Jake climbed into the car. Mrs. Patterson said she saw you on the news, Emma reported. She said you were very brave. And Tommy's mom said his dad went through a bad divorce too, Jake added. She wanted to know if you could help her friend. Sarah met her son's eyes in the rearview mirror. What did you tell her? I told her you help people now. That's what you do. That evening, after homework was finished and dinner was cleared away, Sarah sat in her home office responding to emails from women across the country. Each message told a similar story: manipulation, intimidation, evidence tampering, children used as weapons. But now, instead of feeling helpless, these women had somewhere to turn. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from Portland. Sarah? This is Maria Gonzalez. I saw your story on the news, and I think my husband is doing the same thing to me that yours did to you. Sarah grabbed a notepad and began taking notes. Tell me what's happening, Maria. For the next hour, Sarah listened to a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. A husband who had gradually isolated his wife from friends and family, controlled the finances, and was now using her struggles with postpartum depression as ammunition in their divorce proceedings. His attorney was already threatening to paint Maria as an unfit mother. Maria, Sarah said when the woman finished her story, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Let me connect you with an attorney in Portland who specializes in these cases. And I want you to start documenting everything, every conversation, every threat, every inconsistency in his story. But what if he finds out? What if he doesn't? Sarah interrupted gently. Maria, the only thing scarier than fighting back is not fighting back. Trust me, I know. After hanging up, Sarah walked through her house, checking on her sleeping children, and marveling at how different everything felt now. 3 months ago, she'd been convinced she was losing her mind. 6 weeks ago, she'd been preparing to lose everything. Now, she was helping other women find their own strength and their own truth. Her laptop chimed with an email from Amanda Foster, one of David's former mistresses, who had become an unexpected ally in exposing his pattern of manipulation. Sarah, I wanted you to know that 3 more women have come forward with stories about David. All of them from before he married you. It looks like this behavior goes back decades. The FBI is opening a broader investigation into his business. Practices too. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. You saved all of us. Sarah closed the laptop and walked out onto her back deck, looking out over Puget Sound. The water was calm tonight, reflecting the city lights like scattered diamonds. In the distance, She could see the downtown skyline where Richard Blackwood's office had once loomed like a monument to legal intimidation. That building was dark now, empty, its windows reflecting nothing but Seattle's changeable sky. Her phone buzzed with one last message of the day. This one from Jennifer. The Blackwood firm's client files are being reviewed by the state bar. They found evidence of fraud or evidence tampering in over 60 cases. 60 families, Sarah. That's how many people you saved. Sarah smiled, thinking about all the women who would never have to face what she'd faced. All the children who would never be separated from loving mothers based on manufactured evidence. All the attorneys who would think twice before weaponizing someone's mental health struggles. Tomorrow, she would wake up and continue building the foundation that had grown from her pain into something powerful and transformative. She would answer more phone calls from frightened women who needed to know they weren't alone. She would work with legislators to change laws that had protected predators like David and Blackwood. She would be a mother to Emma and Jake, helping them understand that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent. But tonight, she would simply stand on her deck and breathe in the Seattle air, clean and clear and full of possibility. The woman who had once been told she was too broken to deserve respect, too unstable to trust, too weak to fight back, had not only won her own battle but had opened the door for countless others to win theirs. And that, Sarah thought, as she watched the lights of the city twinkle below, was better than any settlement. Richard Blackwood could have offered. She had her children. She had her home. She had her truth. And she had the power to make sure that no other woman would have to face what she'd faced, alone, afraid, and convinced she was powerless. The photos that had changed everything were now locked away in evidence storage, but their impact would be felt for years to come. They had exposed not just one man's betrayal, but an entire system that had been rigged against women for too long. Sarah Mitchell had walked into that conference room 3 weeks ago expecting to lose everything. Instead, she had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. And Richard Blackwood's smirk? It was nowhere to be found. As she turned to go back inside, Sarah's phone rang one more time. The number was local, and she almost didn't answer. It had been a long day, and she was tired. But something made her pick up. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Judge Catherine Walsh from King County Family Court. I wanted to call you personally to thank you for what you've done. The evidence you uncovered has led to the most significant family court reform in this state's history. But more than that, it's given hope to women who thought they had none. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Your Honor, I just did what I had to do to protect my children. You did what you had to do to protect everyone's children, Judge Walsh corrected. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation is already changing lives, and I want you to know that the court system is listening. We're implementing new procedures to prevent evidence tampering, new training for judges to recognize emotional abuse, and new protections for vulnerable parties. As Sarah hung up the phone and finally headed inside, she thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Broken, isolated, convinced she was the problem. That woman could never have imagined the strength she'd find, the battle she'd win, or the lives she'd change. But she'd been wrong about one thing. She'd thought she was fighting for her children, her home, her dignity. In reality, she'd been fighting for something much bigger. She'd been fighting for justice itself. And she'd won.